I'm going to start in a second, but I just want to point out a hallucination. I use ChatGPT to help write my scripts after doing all my due diligence and research. Uh, ChatGPT fooled me. They put in there that wasn't in the research that the CEO of the company Onsemi had mentioned Weebit Nano. And that, after doing further research, 'cause I'm like, I should verify this because who knows if this is real or not. That ended up being untrue. So again, there's an error in the coming episode. It's a hallucination. All LLMs hallucinate. That's why I don't think the AI hype cycle that LLMs have created is going to continue. But I wanted you to be aware of the fact that when I say in the future of this episode that the CEO of onsemi had mentioned Weebit Nano's technology, that actually didn't occur. That was just ChatGPT fooling me, and I'd already recorded the script, so here it goes. Welcome to XGen Investor. I'm your host, Jake James Vogel. Today, I want to talk about a company I've been tracking closely, Weebit Nano. I own a small position, about 0.6% of my portfolio, and I think it's a fascinating case study on how emerging technology can play out during challenging economic times like the stagflation I expect in the years ahead. Now, let me set the stage. My investment style leans heavily towards hard assets, graphene, metals, and companies solving very practical problems in those spaces. I believe that in a stagflationary world, much like the 1970s, hard assets will outperform. Back then, gold and commodities crushed equities. Most stocks were stagnant or worse, and investors who didn't adapt lost decades of real returns. But there were exceptions. Some companies with new technologies that solved pressing problems quietly laid the foundation for decades of growth. Intel is a classic example. While it struggled through the 1970s on the surface, its technology kept gaining traction, and by the 80s and 90s, it was a powerhouse. That's the lens through which I view Weebit Nano. I don't bet the farm, but I take small positions in companies that might fit that mold. Practical, energy saving, efficiency driving technologies that address real bottlenecks. Hydrograph was one of those. I started small, they answered key questions, I loaded up, and the stock took off. Metallium, MTM Critical Metals, another Dr. James Tour company, has been a massive win for me, up over 200% in the last 9 months, and now my second largest position. Weebit Nano was also founded on Dr. Tour's research. That's not a coincidence. I consider his contributions Nobel worthy. His work has a common thread: solutions that cut waste, reduce energy, and make existing systems better. That's exactly what Weebit's technology is about. So, what problems are they solving? Today, most of our digital world runs on flash memory. But flash has limitations. It wears out over time. It's relatively slow compared to what's possible. It consumes a lot of power, and it struggles in extreme conditions. That's a pain point in industries like automotive, aerospace, industrial IoT, and even medical devices. You don't want a memory chip in a self-driving car or a surgical robot to fail because it overheated or wore down after a few thousand cycles. Weebit's solution is a next-generation memory technology called ReRAM, specifically their OxRAM. Now, without going too far into the weeds, the simple story is this. ReRAM is faster, uses less power, lasts longer, and can operate in harsher environments than flash. It's also compatible with the manufacturing processes that big chip makers already use, which means it doesn't require a wholesale industry overhaul to adopt. That drop-in ready aspect is a huge deal. It lowers the barrier to adoption. We're already seeing validation. Weebit has partnerships with DB High-Tech in Korea and onsemi here in the US. Onsemi's CEO has spoken about Weebit's work publicly, which, for me, is a meaningful signal. When a major semiconductor company is willing to associate its brand with a small cap like Weebit, it shows confidence in the technology. Financially, Weebit's still in the early stages. Revenue is small, about 4.4 million Australian dollars last year, though that was up more than 300% from the year before. Losses are narrowing, and most importantly, they've got roughly 88 million Australian dollars in cash, which gives them about 4 years of runway at current burn rates. That means they have time to keep developing and building partnerships without rushing to raise capital. Of course, like any growth stage company, dilution risk is always on the table, and that's something I watch carefully. So why the 0.6% allocation? Because I think the macro environment will be brutal for most equities over the next several years. Stagflation crushes multiples, squeezes margins, and exposes weak balance sheets. My base case is that hard assets, gold, silver, critical metals, and yes, graphene, will be the big winners. But I don't want to ignore the possibility that companies like Weebit, with genuine problem-solving technologies, will quietly advance under the surface. If they survive this coming cycle, they could be positioned for explosive growth when conditions finally turn. George Gammon often makes the case against buy and hold investing. He argues that blindly holding through lost decades is a recipe for financial stagnation, and that timing cycles and adapting to macro conditions is essential. That's why my strategy with Weebit is to watch, learn, and be ready. I've got a small position to stay engaged, basically, but I'll wait for the right moment, hopefully, ideally during the depths of a stagflationary drawdown, to really increase my allocation if the thesis holds. At the end of the day, investing is about balancing conviction with discipline. My conviction in hard assets is high. That's where I'm heavily allocated. But I keep one eye on the future, because when the cycle turns, and it always does, the survivors in the next generation of technology could define the decades ahead. That's where I see Weebit Nano. A small stake now, patience during the storm, and hopefully a chance to scale in when the timing aligns. As always, this isn't financial advice. I'm just sharing my personal journey and perspective. Do your own due diligence, think independently, and make sure your portfolio reflects your own goals and risk tolerance.